Hi there, Randy Green here. Thank you for listening in on the 12 choices of, as I've written in the whole philosophy book, of living. But actually, it is the 12 choices of life. That is how to honor and respect life force, which is why I enjoy working with my own text material, because I get it as downloads. And in these classes that I here have chosen to do on YouTube for free, because I kind of feel it's important in whatever we will be dealing with, in whatever future that we are engaging into, that we, at least to some degree, have an insight in how the original rules and laws and principles were agreed upon by the original human and humanoid races. And this goes so far back in our history that anyone barely remembers it, and I don't know if it will have any implications whatsoever, and if they are implementable in life as they are now. But it is in the completion cycle, as I also talked about in the whole perception logs and the new reality updates and all of my classes. I keep repeating that just so you kind of don't think, wow, she's just dumping a huge amount of information here, and where can I learn more? And that's where I'm keep telling you, you've been given something here, but it's only 2% of an enormously large pattern that we have to understand if we are to do the elevation, or if we want to attempt the transfer. Otherwise, there's only one way, and that is into the devastation cycles. And not to instill fear, because this is due to laws, and it has been, as I said in the ancient days, has been prophesied in all spiritual teaching systems. You name it, whatever you want to look into, you will see that this is the message that is hidden in it, and it has been turned into a religion and a worshipping of gods, and it has all to do with moral and ethics, which are also good for the best way of being a human inside this reality, in terms of the hijackers' programs. So we are here trying to exceed that, and that process of true awakening, which I think, again, that's why I made my take on Buddhism, covers the basis to the largest degree, going into the original understandings, which when we talk about Christianity or the Abrahamic religions in plural, because they kind of stem from one group of people in the Middle East, and then it divided into three different religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but technically they have the same root, which they all acknowledge, but they're still fighting each other, which is interesting, because they're fighting over who is interpreting the original teachings correctly. And then we are in some of the mud that follows religions, and that's always who's interpreting it correct and who is not. And then we have separatism and segregism, if there's even a word called that, separatism, and then they segregate and go into fighting each other instead of figuring out, okay, how can we actually put this trinity together, and then put the pieces of the puzzle together to get the great overview where we create synergy and lift all of our people into their highest potentials. And that is what these teachings are all about. It's about how do we lift each other into the highest potential and the highest progression rate, following the highest standards, and in our organic form create the highest purity rate. And that has been, again, the purity rate has been twisted. For instance, the Puritans, which are very strong in America and is the foundation of the American type of Christianity, even though many have forgotten that. But the ones that left for America were mainly Puritans, because we didn't want them here in Europe, because they were zealots. They were fanatic in their way of perceiving what it meant to be Puritan. And at the same time, the Puritans, I'm not saying that they had it here in Europe, because we don't know, but there is definitely a high degree of child abuse and all sorts of things that follows with people that are in that level of type of religion. Let me put that. That's a little bit of a claim here. I'm sorry. I feel the twisting of the energies that goes with that. But there is some truth to it. The more fanatic you get, the more distortion you also tend to have, because you stop being inclusive. You begin to become separatistic. And once you do that, you position yourself in one end of the polarity, and you stop creating harmony out of the oppositions. You stop using the original ways of how energy is supposed to be utilized. So when things become unbalanced, they have a tendency to distort into perversion. So we are here talking about energetic dynamics more than psychology. And I think that's also important for us when we do this work, that we understand that psychology in its essence is energy and it's electrochemical processes that we, of course, influence by the manner that we're utilizing our body and our minds and how we perceive and interpret reality, ourselves, our physical form and everything around us. And that's a respect for life as well. So when I call it the 12 choices of life here, that's more accurate because it's all about how to preserve and develop life force. Then there are the 12 choices that goes with the principles, which will be the mastery of choices, which is the next level of series I will make. And then there is mastery of progression or of actual living that goes with what we call the laws and the rules of engagement. But the laws are also in both the principles, but also in the 12 choices of life or the living. And that means that the living must respect each other to generate more life force. And that is something we have forgotten. And we have heard it in the whole do not kill, do not cause harm, do not take away life from any other living being. And we have always interpreted, in all religions, it's interpreted, you must not kill. And that is correct. But this is again where we can say that as I talked about, once the life force and the vitality and the energy system is out of the physical form, then it is just the same type of matter as our table is made of. So it's not the physical form that is hinted at here. And for that to truly understand that, you technically have to have the original capacity to read the original languages. And that's why I dived into theology and learn to read the Gospels in ancient Greek and Latin and the Hebrew Bible in ancient Hebrew, even though as it turned out, it was the original Hebrew texts were forgotten in its Hebrew language and were translated into Greek, actually, the Septuaginta, which is what we call, there was a group of Jewish rabbis in Egypt, of all places, in Alexandria at the time, that had been there was a group of Jews in diaspora in what is called in Egypt. They were scattered both to Babylon, but also to Egypt. And there, this group of elders or priests decided to retranslate it from Greek back into Hebrew and then, in a way, reinvent the Hebrew language. So that means that the original Hebrew understanding of things to a large degree probably has been forgotten. And we're seeing that when we talk about the teachings of the Buddha, what he taught in, and then the reviewing and reviving of it 200 to 300 years later and written in Pali. But that's again a made-up language for, was it the language he spoke? As we're talking about the discussion with Jesus, was he talking Hebrew? No, he was talking Aramaic. So that's the what we call the profaner, the commoner version of Hebrew, or Ivrit, because Hebrew is a sacred language, is only utilized by the priest. And the priest forgot it. So you see where we're going. It's a little bit of a take there. It's not completely accurate, but there is something to it. Of course, they had some kind of remembering. But it would be the same as if we find 2 or 3 text material of the oldest level of European people that had written it down, which would probably be done in Latin, and that's Roman or Italian language. So we're having issues here when we talk about what is the true perception and origin of text and the understanding of them. That's also. And in that manner, I'm pleased that I did it within the University of Copenhagen and just not did it on my own, because I already had a lot with me. I've a past life studying the Kabbalah in Hebrew, so I already had it, but it just needed to be revived, so to speak. But getting it into the University of Copenhagen and looked upon with modern perceptions of how do you actually, in a methodical way, study ancient texts. what is necessary to really be observant of when you study ancient texts, and what are the implications, and what has been done to them, and etc., and all of these kind of things. But compared to if I'd done it on my own, I would have done as everybody else that have studied, which I saw. I read books of people that had learned the Hebrew language, studying it on their own, and then try to interpret the Kabbalah or the ancient or the Hebrew Bible, because it is linked to the Kabbalah. There is some hidden understanding of the numerical values and the letters themselves that are tied into a specific system that in the Middle Ages were called Gematria, I think it's called, where you understand the secret meaning of the letters. But that in itself is not enough, because it's built off in a very, very complex structure that technically takes a deep level of meditation, which most that are doing that go insane. And that is also what happened to me in my ancient or my old incarnation, which I remembered long before I even began studying Hebrew at the University of Copenhagen. So that's certainly what pushed me, because I had the choice. Should I do it on my own again and probably lose my mind? Or should I try to do it within what we could call an ordered context of an institution that are praising itself to work from a scientific angle? And I am pleased I did that, because it taught me a lot. It was the hardest time of my life, as many other things, but a different type of hard, because it was a challenge to my brain, and it was a challenge to my curiosity, and it was a challenge to my entire self-esteem as a human being, being in an environment where I was not respected and recognized, or was actually seen as everything but something that they wanted to listen to. So that was a little bit of a challenge, including I'm not an exams person, so that was also stressful. And studying things that others put in front of me and telling me this is what you need to do with the way my brain works is also very tiring. It's literally read one page of scientific information and I just doze off, because there is no imagery. My brain simply just shuts down. It tells me this is not knowledge you need to know. So that is also how I function. I kind of know what I need to know, and I know what is just what we call a noise that humans have made for their own mind processes. And there's a reason why I mentioned this. So when we talk about the whole deeper understanding of, for instance, when we talk about do not kill, that it's said in the Hebrew Bible as one of the 10 commandments, it is actually, it ties back to, because it has this inbuilt understanding of the book of Genesis, that is the Bereshit, that is the first book in the beginning, where it is said that, first and foremost, it's tied to, there are two creational stories. So this is, again, we're going to some really deep shit here, but there are two creational stories. There's one where the Elohim, the supreme powers, created the male and the female in their liking. That's the consciousness level. So that's why it's translated the male and the female. It's not man and woman. It is the female and the male as principles in their liking, and they are created as light units. This is technically, the book of Genesis is all about the patterns. It's all about the creational patterns that are behind creation. That's also why it's 7 days. And we have the number 7 similarly in the Aryan creational stories, where we talk about the 7 letters of creation. So it goes with numerical values and it goes with letter values, which are technically the best way you can in human language interpret code systems, right? So that's about the whole foundation of the universal structures. So when you say, well, on the 3rd day, the stars and the heavens and whatever was created, it's the foundation of it, it's the blueprint. That's the supreme powers. And we can liken them with the ancient ones, if you like, because I put them a little bit higher than the Colontics do. I do not see them as part of the founding fathers or the 5th dimension and that triple hierarchy that is up there. But that's humanoid, and I'm here talking from a different angle of true humans. Not that it is dissimilar, but there, again, interpretation and what we are putting into and where we see our origin of the universal structure, right? So that goes into that one again. But When we have the Yahweh, which is what we call the physical form, and Yahweh is actually a deity, and a deity is an alien, and we are then having where Adam and Eve is pushed out of the Garden of Eden, which we know alludes to the Anunnaki gods and the Garden of Eden that was there as well. Inanna had her own Garden of Eden, and we know it's depicted in both Egyptian mythology as well as in all sorts of ancient texts. So that's a kind of a replicate of an ongoing creational myth that were in the Mediterranean and area, as well as Mesopotamia and the whole Levant, that whole peninsula. I keep saying it wrong. I know in Danish, sorry about that. Again, studying things in Danish and then translating it into English is a little bit of a complicated thing. So again, we have Egypt, we have Israel, we have Babylon that were original in Mesopotamia that changed all depending on which rulers were there, which is now become Iran and Iraq and Syria, and that whole area going down to India. And of course, they were in contact with each other. They were trading with each other. They were trading all sorts of foods and metals and what have you, clothing, what have you. We're seeing remnants of that. There are more and more proof of that. The idea that all of these countries were divided were the first beginning ideas of the European or white men sciences stemming from Europe, actually, and then going out, and they were seeing everybody else as primitives. Of course, they were not trading with each other, but we have having at that time some pretty high cultures that were really onto things. They might not have written down long text because that either the letters were only used numerical as in trade, or they were used by the priest, and then there was sacred text. So there were laws about not everybody was writing little stories because that was not how it was at the time. There were divisions of who was allowed to use spelling, right? You see what I'm saying here, because it was connected to the divine creation, and there's a reason for that. So again, when we go into the second creational myth, we have this lesser god, that is Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, that created the physical reality. So we have the supreme powers that created the highest levels, and then you have the representation inside this reality, and that's how you are to see Yahweh as the representation of that. And that goes with the two different layers of the Hebrew letters and the classification that goes in three categories that follows the Kabbalistic tree that is also built into three categories. So you're having these three layers all over the place. It's a common understanding of the Trinity. You have the divine powers, that's the highest, that's God, quote unquote. You know, I don't feel that way or mean that way. And then you have the angelic level, where we have the sons of God, or the son, just shortened down in the Greek version, because it was not supposed to be similar to the angels, right? Because Christ was supposed to be something entirely unique and something else, but he came from the heavenly realms, right? And then you have the physical realm that goes with the mundane level, where all of our mortals are living. And this goes in that Trinity structure where, and that is governed by the Shekinah, or the Holy Ghost, or the holographic teaching system, or however you want to put these ancient technologies that have been given many different names because people have seen them, and then of course interpreted it within the language. And there is no doubt whatsoever that in both Brahmic religions, as well as in Sumerian religion and the priesthoods all over the place, from India to Egypt and that whole area, there were the white hats and there were the black hats. And that's the problem that we're having here, because many of the original teachings were distorted and twisted to fit the purpose of the black hats. And that's what we are left with. And that's also an understanding we have to have. So when we talk about the translation and understanding the ancient text, only those of us who technically read them in their original function and purpose as part of the priests, as part of the temple culture, and not as part of the divinities, but on the understanding of the secret levels of reality, that it was not gods but aliens that we were dealing with, then you begin to see how things fall in place. And that was some of the secrets that the priesthoods were carrying with them. And that's why it was easily twisted into something else, because you were not dealing with pure divine beings. You were dealing with aliens with all of their own issues of regression and inversion and genetic structures that were falling apart, and the purpose of what was supposed to happen with the humans there. And I think that movie, 10,000 BC, in some way kind of depicts it. In a way where they are actually questioning that the so-called divine beings that are in the temples, are they even divine or are they actually something else? So I think that is a good representation of that. That's probably one of the only movies that goes into it in a way that is, it goes back. When I watch that movie, it reminds me of the Osirians. There was something in it there. Whoever made that movie were given something, because that was very similar to what the Osirians did. That's how they ran their societies. They were not the pyramid builders. That was another group, but the Osirians had their own communities, and that's all I can say about that, because I don't know where and how. It's just a memory, and these are one of the Egyptian races that have been forgotten. We are only left with the culture around the pharaohs, but there were many other types of Egyptians that goes back to Atlantis. Okay, so that was a little bit going back to do not kill. So we're having these you need to understand the context of these things to really grasp the implications of why it's not that simple. Because in the second book of Genesis, where you have the snake, and that's the only place where we kind of get a little bit of a view into that one. First and foremost, you had the creational patterns that were made by the Elohim, the supreme powers. Then you had the manifested God inside this reality, although angelic from the celestial realms, right? Alien, what have you. And technically, when we talk about the celestial beings here, they are avian mammals. They are the ones that are also the foundation of the Anunnaki and the superhumans of the Anunnaki, of the ones that were part of the Egyptian pantheon, as well as the gods that we see in Greece and all these kind of things. They are what we call demigods. They're half human or half mammal, and then they're half either raptoid or avian or something else that gives them other features that we normally have. And that is what we could say, that's one of the traits of these heavenly beings, quote unquote. Not aliens, but some of the original races that were part of the humanoid that were part of the original Pillar Project and changed because of the hijacking. So that's also to be taken into consideration. And by that, got different areas of our planet under their jurisdiction, and by that put themselves in the position of being gods, when in fact they were just humanoids that suddenly felt that now whatever was going on inside our reality was theirs to take and theirs to control and theirs to supervise, and by that re-engineering everything to their purpose, and thereby becoming the gods of what they have re-engineered, right? And what was inside this reality were the humans that were taken captured and re-engineered and put into lesser vessels and becoming the meek and the powerless and the poor, which technically means to be powerless. So that is how that happened, and that ended for most of us. And that is one of the awakening processes, to go through that unfortunate series of events that led to why we are stuck in this physical form, which is also a psychological challenge as we go through these layers and recognize that we were probably a little bit too naive when it came to the whole humanoid thing, especially as they regressed further and further. We should probably had made some other choices than we did, but I know personally that that's because the councils got infiltrated, so it was not understood before it was way too late. And then it was too late. It was just too late, and it happened overnight. And that's also some of the psychological structures that we are to deal with as we awaken and remember who and what we are, our failures and our misinterpretations of things, which is also part of the completion cycle to understand that. And in a way, when we talk about the whole forgiveness, for me, it's not as much forgiving others because that's their own business, but what they choose to do, and whatever we forgive them or not, just not change how they perceive us. And what they do is like try to forgive a crocodile for killing a gazelle, but the crocodile will still kill and kill and kill because it's in its nature. There's no point in forgiving it. But there is a point in forgiving ourselves. Because that is, if you are keeping yourself in stronghold of shame and guilt, then you are kept in a pattern that will take away your life force. That's part of the way that we have been engineered to be susceptible for these negative forces that will literally put ourselves into the position of wearing ourselves out with these negative emotions. So it's not that we are suppress them, but we are to understand the root of them and clear them out and understand where that pattern comes from and why that is. And then at the same time, go into the pattern, go into the shame, go into the guilt, and then look at what did we do that leaves this emotion in us aside from the energetic parasites. It has a root, it has an origin. And what did we do that led to that feeling of failure, so that we know, sorry, I get emotional when I talk about this. So give me 2 seconds. Wow. So that we get why we chose to do what we chose to do and why that led us astray and away from the original path of progression. And that is where we feel the shame, because we should have known better. Those of us who came here, we knew what the fuck we were dealing with. Anyway, so that's interesting. It's always interesting when I talk about these things, the emotions that suddenly comes up. Either it's because someone wants to shut my heart field down, or it's because it has a pattern that there pops up and then gives me, again, some of these distortion feelings that we will interpret as sadness. And it's good because that's the purification of the heart field. The heart field only opens when we clear the sadness. It does not open when we feel joy. It opens when we clear the sadness. And then we go into balance, and then we can feel tranquility, which is the, not joy, but it is the balance point of oppositions, which is what I call harmony. Okay. So going back to do not kill, in the second creational myth, you have the snake that tempts her Eve or Chava to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And it's not an apple, it's just translated the fruit. So it could be anything, or it could just mean whenever you have a fruit of something, then it means it's the result, the end result of something. So whether the tree of knowledge is an actual tree, or it is a symbolic tree representation of the lineages or of the Pillar Project or whatever. This is where the commoners or within the physical reality translates it as a literal. It's a tree and it's a fruit. Whereas if you go into the middle level, that is also part of the Kabbalistic tree, you will see that is symbolic representation of something else that goes with a specific code system. And that's the 3 layers. You need to do the physical, the representation, the energetic representation, and its code system. The 3 layers, you go, whatever you're dealing with, that's the unraveling, and each one of these have many different layers to them. So it's not just 1, 2, 3, but it's 1, 2, 3 that is then divided out into other 7 layers that goes with either patterns of 7 or patterns of 9 or patterns of 12, which is complicated. So you can add that one up. 7 plus 3 gives 10. That's the Draco. 7 plus 3 plus 9 gives 12. That goes with the true humans. And then you also have the 12 that goes with 3. And then you have 15. And then you have the highest layer. You can combine all these letters and numbers in different ways, but that goes with the different levels you're working on. So are you working on 10, or are you working on 11, or are you working on 12, or are you working on 13 or 14 and 15? And these are the highest layers, as you know, from of the universal structure, as you know, from the Keylontic sciences, with the highest stargates that are here. And that's with the core domains. And it's all about what is in the core domain of the original coding of consciousness that divides out into the inner domain and out to the middle domain and the outer domain. And these are the layers we work our way back so that we get all of these different features of our energy system. So she is eating of the tree of life, and whatever that is, that could be knowledge, that could be an actual fruit, it could be a fruit with knowledge, we don't know. So we have to keep our mind open when we interpret the text material and see it as a meditation. It is for a meditation. It is not to be preached in the church that Eve was the first woman, and therefore all women in this world should carry the original sin of eating of the tree of life. That is not what we are talking about here. here. And because she ate of the tree of life or the tree of knowledge, we can discuss whether it was the one or the other. Then if it was the tree of knowledge, then that technically means that the foremother of all humans in this reality, of women in this reality, holds the secret knowledge of the highest level of reality, because Adam only ate it as a second, so he didn't get the first bite. And there's also a little thing going on with the first of the first of the first that is something very special, whereas if you do the second level, you don't get the highest level of it. So that means technically that women are the strongest if you go into that interpretation system, right? So no wonder we're being suppressed. But she was cursed, right? She was cursed with the snake around her left foot that would bite her in the heel for eternity. And because of that, she was to give birth in pain, right? So that's the punishment. So we're also having a punishing element going on here. And Adam only had the punishment of being dressed in skin clothing. So, and then he had to work with his head bent and always looking to the ground. And these are two of the curses of humanity. That goes actually back to Inanna, which is interesting. But they are put there to prevent us from getting access to our original potential. So men are working and working and working, always looking into the ground. Where the ground, what does the ground do? He preserves the ground. He works with the ground to create some kind of growth, and from that he can harvest his fruits of his labor, right? Whereas the woman, she is to give, she will not harvest the fruit of her labor. On the contrary, she will in her labor be in severe pain. So you're again seeing some dynamics there that are not just to be interpreted physically, but also energetically, which is very important. And in my optics, there is a reason why men are focused on money and the energy of money and that's one of their Achilles heels, the whole money. One of the weaknesses in men are this constant feeling of have to earn more money. That's part of that curse. And women are constantly thinking I need to produce offspring, which is part of that curse, but that's a whole other discussion. So going back to the understanding of death, all of this has to do with life force, because money is an example of life force, and giving birth is an example of life force. So there is a reason why I'm talking about these things. It's not just, oh yeah, now Ren is spinning off out on a tangent. There is a purpose with this. So Eve or Chava is have eaten of the fruit of life, or eaten from the fruit of the tree of life or the tree of knowledge. We don't really know. There are two different trees in the Garden of Eden, as we are told. And she says, I'm not supposed to do that. That goes against the law of what God has told me to do, of how I'm supposed to be in the garden. And the snake says, and she says, if I break these laws, I will die. And it's called moth, M-O-T-H, and it's not like a dragon moth. That's the English word, but here in Hebrew it's called a moth, and which is an M word that has a numerical value, and the letter O has a numerical value, and the letter T and the letter Chaim, which is an H, has also a letter value that has a significance. So therefore it's not just a word, it's also a letter sequence that has an understanding of how to interpret it on the tree of life. That is the Kabbalistic tree. So you know which sephirah that interferes with when you die, M-O-T-H. You will know which one of the sephirah that connects to, and that's signifying some of the paths that will be extinguished if that happens. But if you, and then the snake says, you will not die. And he here says, you will not, how is it? Is she say, I will surely die? Or is this a snake that you will surely not die? I can't remember. But one of them is saying, the point being is, if you only die once, you will only lose your physical form. If you die twice, you will lose your physical form and your energy system. So when it's in the Bible is translated, you will surely die. In Hebrew, it's called you will moth. You will die twice. When you die twice, you die, because then it's your body and your energy system, and all that's left is your viable genetics. And that has something to do with when you die outside or from the outer domains, you will be recirculated. You will just go into reincarnation. But if you die twice, you will stop reincarnating. You will go into the abyss and evaporate. And that's the true death. So just losing your physical form is not death. Death It is just losing your physical form, but you will still have your energy system. But if you die twice, die, then you will go into the abyss. And that's the true death. And then there is the in-between death where you will lose your physical form, but you will be sent to hell. And that's the punishment. So there are some implications there that we have to be part of that culture to understand that. And that understanding is found both in Egyptian culture. That's why they have the Book of the Dead of how to avoid ending in hell when you die. When you shed off your physical form, you have to figure out a way to avoid the underworld. The same goes with Mesopotamian myth, which has not been put into the later cultures in that way that it was originally, but we are seeing glimpses of it as well as in Judaism, where the Geshana, where you can go into the underworld, which is interesting because if you can go to the underworld, you technically should also be able to go to the heavens. But that's where we have to understand the Hebrews. They had only the selected ones of the hand of God will be elevated or sent to heavens. The rest will go to the underworld, which is interesting. So they have a little bit of a different perspective of that. But that goes with the original sin. We are all born sinners. That was what Luther, the German priests, were trying to go against and say, yes, we are all born sinners, but we are also due to the corpus of Christ and being part of Christ in baptism, are we also giving the green card for the resurrection and for the redemption. So that was what he was saying, where the Jews are saying, well, we're all born sinners, because unless we follow the path of the God, and he sees it in his eyes, in his grace, to elevate us back to where we came from, because we have worked off our sins. That is the burden of work and the burden of labor, which is, again, you're seeing the double interpretation of it, will be lifted back into the heavens. And with that one, I want to end this one, and I will continue in the next video. Thank you.